everyone, and welcome to the Debrief on ABC News Live. I'm Kimberly Brooks. Thanks so much for joining us. We have full on-the-ground coverage of Hurricane Dorian as it continues to slam the Bahamas. Plus, we check in on the U.S. coastal cities and Florida as it braces for the storm. And we give you the latest on that deadly boat fire in Southern California. But first, here are your headlines.
This massive fire at this apartment building in North Philadelphia. More than 100 firefighters eventually got it under control, but the roof collapsed. The building was vacant. No word on the cause of the fire. ABC News has learned the gunman in the Odessa, Texas mass shooting failed a federal background gun check because he had been clinically diagnosed as being mentally ill. Authorities say shortly before 36-year-old Seth Ator began his rampage on the highway that ended in this swarm of bullets. He was fired from his trucking job. He and his employer then both dialed 911. Ator also called the FBI tip line just 15 minutes before the gunfire erupted.
The real estate tycoon at the center of the HBO documentary, The Jinx, is expected to go on trial today for murder after years of delays. 76-year-old Robert Durst is accused of killing his longtime confidant, Susan Berman, at her Beverly Hills home nearly 20 years ago. Prosecutors say he did it to keep her from talking to police about the 1982 disappearance of his wife. Durst was arrested in 2015 after he appeared to confess in the documentary.
Pennywise, the character from Stephen King's hit movie It, was spotted riding New York's subway on the weekend. Magician Alejandro Torres decided to keep his costume on for his commute home to Brooklyn after working on a video shoot, startling other subway riders. The video, first posted on Instagram, has since gone viral with over 620,000 hits.
We begin with Hurricane Dorian. Were you guys able to see the videos and images over the weekend? It's a massive, catastrophic storm sitting on the top of Grand Bahama Island for the last 48 hours since it made landfall as a Category 5 on Sunday. A brutal lashing that has left at least 5 people dead in the Abaco Islands. And we have full on-the-ground coverage all day. And I want to bring in our ABC meteorologist, Greg Dutra, who's been with us all day for the latest storm track. And Greg, I want to ask you, have you ever seen anything like this in the Atlantic?
I truly have not, and we've never seen satellite pictures of something like it either. The only other one, 1965 Hurricane Betsy. I don't remember it. Most people probably weren't paying attention to hurricanes in the Atlantic at that point either. And this has now taken second place. It only moved 25 miles, over the past 24 hours. That is absolutely absurd. And through the next 24 hours, it is finally going to get a move on. Let's go on over to the maps. We'll take a look here at that movement, which is now flying compared to what it was before. It was stationary or virtually stationary, moving at almost 1 mile per hour over the last 24 hours. Now it is finally getting a move on, moving northwest at 5 miles per hour. And that was the key we were looking for. It was moving west and then became stationary. And we were thinking, please move north, because if you don't, you're going to move into Florida. It has finally taken that northerly jog, and that's what it'll continue to do up the coast. It has also weakened somewhat, which makes sense because it sat still. Hurricanes really need warm water. There's been some upwelling of colder water, and that has done some damage to the structure of the hurricane, which is very good for folks that have interest along the eastern seaboard. Let's take a look at what's now driving Hurricane Dorian, as that ridge has broken down but parted and allowed this trough to kind of scoop up Dorian and then move it up the eastern seaboard. That'll continue through about the next 3 or 4 days as Hurricane Dorian starts to pick up strength. We're not going to see those long-lasting effects hang around the Bahamas any longer, but some of those tracks do still bring landfall into the Carolinas, so we cannot completely rule it out just yet. Another thing we're tracking from just north of West Palm Beach all the way out to Cape Lookout in North Carolina, we are seeing storm surge 3 to 5 feet down off to the south, and then rainfall on top of that. To give you an idea of some of the spots that are really concerned about this, Wilmington, North Carolina, and Charleston. Charleston has problems with just severe thunderstorms. You put up to 4 to 7 feet of storm surge and then more rainfall on top of that, along with wave action, and you're talking about some big problems there in the coastal Carolinas. So we're still keeping a very close eye on the Carolinas, but that is really where we're shifting the focus, although you can't rule out problems in northern Florida too, especially around Jacksonville with some coastal flooding. Kim?
All right, Greg, we appreciate that. And I want to go to Bahamas because the situation down in the islands is nothing short of terrifying. Unbelievable devastation. You can see it there. Storm surge and flooding that left people trapped in their homes as the water continued to rise. And our Marcus Moore is on the ground in Marsh Harbor as people are trying their best to survive. Marcus?
Swim! 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 Watch as the dangerous floodwaters sweep these 4 people away. In a race against time, our team is there, and my producer urging them to swim for their lives until they reach safety on higher ground. The group rushing to a shelter in the eye of the storm, racing to safety before the dangerous winds return.
Follow me, take your time.
Scenes like this undoubtedly playing out across the Bahamas in the wake of deadly Hurricane Dorian.
The devastation here is breathtaking. You can see that building behind me. It has collapsed. And look at this yacht on the ground resting up against this condo.
That's the front porch. The water is about 6 feet.
The rising floodwaters pouring into people's homes. This video showing the water breaching a second-floor apartment, creeping up the stairs and slamming into the window. The water so high, only rooftops were visible. And in this home, the floodwaters coming up the stairs. The furniture bobbing in the water. Ezra King and his cousin have been using a bulldozer to rescue people from their homes and take them to shelters. Category 5 storms shredding home after home. The Salvation Army estimating up to 13,000 have either been damaged or destroyed. The Coast Guard sending helicopters to rescue about a dozen people. WPLG reporter Janice Fernandez describing the apocalyptic scene.
But it truly does. It looks like a bomb just went off. Mother Nature is so much more powerful than I could ever imagine.
Rescuers receiving thousands of distress calls, but the floodwaters too dangerous to traverse.
It is extremely dangerous. I've never seen anything like this before in my entire life.
The Freeport, Bahamas airport submerged. Residents returning to what's left of their community, now covered in debris for as far as the eye can see. Boats and cars littering the street, now a familiar scene.
And you can see the power of this storm. Trees have been snapped, this boat left on its top. Just absolutely incredible damage.
Officials telling residents to stay indoors, keep hammers ready in case they have to escape the attic.
It's unbelievable, right? That floating furniture. Also in Marsh Harbor, we're getting the first glimpse of the damage in the Bahamas. So I want to go to Brian Eli. He's a photographer for our affiliate WPLG. Brian?
I don't even know. I don't even have the words to tell you. Well, where we're at right now is, we are, things are stable. In terms of the structures that we're in, we've got food and water to get us through the next few days. So what we're doing right now is we're just trying to figure out logistics on the island. So anytime you have a hurricane like this in the States or here in the Bahamas, they go through much the same process of starting to clear the roads. Starting last night, we've seen Coast Guard flying around by helicopter. So we know that they've done inspections of points at which they can land and start getting aid to the island. I just saw two members of our crew just arrived from the government building, which is near the airport. They had to walk there while they're still waiting to get the roads cleared between here and there. So we're at the point where we're starting to get contact with the outside world, which is good. But what's been different about this storm is just how long it has persisted. Even right now, we're just picking up another squall of rain is coming through. The wind is still remarkable. 2 days later, so I've done a number of these hurricanes in the past, and normally you get wild weather for a day or so, a few hours, and it ends up clearing up. But this one, it just hasn't stopped.
It's so much devastation. It's unbelievable. One thing you were saying earlier is that the maps of the Bahamas might change.
They may have to be redrawn. Seeing some of the stuff that we've gotten in from aerial footage, it does look like homes, businesses, beach erosion. There's a possibility that you actually see geographical differences in the maps going forward after they finally get the cleanup all done.
Wow, if that's not crazy.
It's incredible.
So as Greg said, while the Bahamas are getting bruised, the U.S. coastal cities are anticipating and waiting for Dorian to make landfall in the Carolinas. In fact, cities from South Florida to the Carolinas have been issuing mandatory evacuations, and our Rob Marciano is about an hour outside of Orlando on the coast in Melbourne, Florida. So, Rob, can you give us an idea of what's happening where you are?
Well, as you can see, Kimberly, the wind has picked up quite a bit. It's been pretty steady for the past 24 hours, but the last couple of hours, we've really seen a tick up in the miles per hour. Haven't had a whole lot of rain. We've had some bands come through late last night, and then earlier this morning, they come in through every maybe 30 or 40 minutes. And when that happens, I mean, it blows even harder, and obviously the rain comes down in a ferocious manner. But right now, we're dry. So we got almost some sunlit surf behind me. We're coming up on high tide was about an hour ago, so the tide is retreating, but you see some of this wave action here. So this is on top of the surge. We are getting a surge right now of about maybe 2 or 3 feet. When the storm gets abreast of us later on tonight, we'll see a high tide cycle around midnight, and that's when we expect to see the full storm surge forecast of 6 to 7 feet, maybe more than that. Now, we're obviously very elevated from that surf line. You can see, and I'm not sure if you can see directly below me, are sand dunes that line much of the barrier islands here on the east coast of Florida. What's different from the east coast of Florida versus, say, the Panhandle and the Gulf Coast of Florida, when Hurricane Michael came through last year, when Hurricane Katrina came through in 2005, they had a massive storm surge of 20-plus feet. We're not going to see that with this storm because the way everything is kind of laid out. And we have these dunes that protect us. So there shouldn't be a whole lot of breaches of these dunes, but there will be a few of them up A1A, and we're worried about that, and that's one of the reasons that this area, for the most part, has been evacuated. We're also under an astronomically high tide. This is a king tide season, so we added another foot or two to that, so not exactly great timing. So we await the arrival of Hurricane Dorian. I can't get my name straight anymore. When you compare Dorian to Matthew, which came through 3 years ago, they're still repairing some of the roadways that were damaged from the surge from Hurricane Matthew 3 years ago. Those same areas, I would imagine, tomorrow we'll check it out in the morning, I would imagine they're going to be susceptible to seeing more in the wave of surge. But Matthew, if you want to compare it, very similar track, stayed right off the coast and just raped the entire coastline of Florida. That did $1.5 billion in damage to this state and almost $16 billion to the entire southeast U.S. So you don't need a landfalling hurricane to do some serious damage, and that's what we're most concerned about here in the next 36 hours as it comes here, heads towards Georgia, and then eventually through the Carolinas Thursday, Friday. Not even halfway done with this yet. Kimberly?
Yes, Rob, you've covered a lot of hurricanes, and we appreciate the updates right there in Melbourne, Florida. Thank you so much. And guys, the hurricane, it is a couple days away from doing any damage that it might do on the U.S. coast. But the point of this coverage is so you have the latest information and you can prepare as best as you can. As of now, there is still time. So now we're going to move much farther up north to New Smyrna Beach, Florida, about 20 minutes from Daytona, where we find our Gio Benitez. Gio, you actually had to evacuate and come to this town, right?
Yeah, that's right, Kim. We actually had to left because they were closing down our hotel there in Daytona Beach, and then we came over here to New Smyrna. We're actually a little more inland. This is the intercoastal, so it's not the beach necessarily. But I want to tell you, because from Florida, we've got those mandatory evacuations in place right now from West Palm Beach all the way up to North Carolina. We've got those Outer Banks also under mandatory evacuation. So we're talking about 4 states: Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, Carolina, North Carolina, all of those coastal communities right now under that mandatory evacuation. And it's very important that you listen to that, because if you are having some issues and you need some help during a storm and you stay behind, well, emergency services can't get to you. Rescuers can't get to you because they have that mandatory evacuation in place. That's why they want you out, so that they can focus those resources elsewhere. So they want that. I want to show you, because Rob was talking about that storm surge, and we're starting to see that here, but we also have that high tide that Rob was talking about, okay? This is a boat dock, and I just want to say before I do this, it is still safe to do this, but I just want to show you what this is like, because this high tide is a little more than usual, obviously, because you're not going to usually find a dock underwater. The concern is what happens when that storm surge moves through, and how much of these streets. Let's turn the camera around real quick if we can here, just so you can see, Lincoln. You can see the streets. During the other hurricanes, these streets got totally flooded. So it depends what happens with this storm surge and with this tide, and we will see that throughout the night. But no doubt, this is the concern right now, the high tide and that coming storm surge.
Wow, that's unbelievable to see you standing in that. I just want to ask you, are people less worried knowing that it's not going to make landfall in Florida?
You know what? I got to tell you, a lot of people boarded up. Let's just turn around here, because remember, we are not in the evacuation zone right now, but check this out. See, we got this house right here. It's just boarded up right there. This house over on this side here, it's also boarded up. So even though the folks here aren't in evacuation zones, they are taking this seriously, because this right here is not an evacuation zone. They're still taking it seriously. I was down over there downtown looking for some food at the restaurants. There's only one restaurant open. All of those businesses are closed down right now. And you have the beach side just totally empty. And just remember, this was Labor Day weekend, right? You'd expect to have a lot more people there. That wasn't the case. Kim.
All right, Gio Benitez right there in New Smyrna in Florida. Thank you so much for the updates, Gio. And then we're going to go all the way up north to Jacksonville. And I want to bring in Kaylee Hartung, who is right there in Atlantic City, Florida. And Kaylee, from what we can see, it looks like there's about to be a downpour where you are.
Yeah, that's what we think, Kimberly. The sky has darkened behind me so quickly, we think it's a matter of minutes before the rain is coming down here, which we really have not yet experienced to this point. You can see the sea foam here. I mean, it is coming already so high up this beach, where an access point is right here. That's not where the tide would usually be coming, even at its highest tide. You said we're here in Atlantic Beach. I've got the Chief of Police, Michelle Cook, here with me. You were kind enough to let us hop in the car when you all got a call that there were some people in the water. These beaches have been closed since the night before last, and yet explain to us what we saw when we got here.
Sure. Unfortunately, we have folks that are venturing out into the water. It's really choppy, it's really unsafe, and this is just, this is a nightmare situation for us, because they're out there and we can't get them in, and they're refusing to come in, and that just makes our first responders very uneasy to have people out in the water like this.
The concern, rip currents. What do you see when you look out there and you see waves this size?
Rip currents are an issue. The waves are really choppy. They're really rough. The water's rough, and our ocean rescue folks would have a heck of a time trying to get out there to help anybody if they needed help.
These beaches, like we said, have been closed since the day before last, and yet we see people walking their dogs, kids with their feet in the water. What is your message to people in your community right now?
The message is stay out of the water. Stay off the beach, stay out of the water. All we need is one rogue wave or somebody to get knocked off their feet and swept out into the ocean. It is a spectacle. It is interesting to see. If you wanted to come to one of the end zones and stand on the pavement and look, that's one thing, but please don't venture out in the sand. Please don't venture out into the water.
We had to walk over one of these berms that's been built. At first glance, it looks like maybe you put the sand there just to keep people off the beach, but it's been explained to me they serve a much greater purpose.
Yeah, absolutely. So we put sand at the end zones to prevent the wave action from going up into the streets, which will ultimately protect the property of the homes that are along the beach side and the businesses that are along the beach side.
You've lived in this area your whole life. Talk me through your perspective on this storm as you see it headed this way, what you've experienced here in storms past. Not that long ago it was Matthew, and then it was Irma. What looks familiar to you when you see this path?
The rough surf, the rough seas all look familiar. Unfortunately, because we've only taken glancing blows in the past, people are very lax. And, you know, this is a catastrophic storm as we see what happened in the Bahamas. And for me, the concern is people are being very relaxed about it. You know, we don't want people to panic. We don't want people to have anxiety, but don't get too relaxed, because one bump over and next thing you know, we're in the middle of severe damage, and we don't want that. We want people just to stay inside, stay in town, and just stay away from the beach.
You know, not only is the beach closed, but this is also an area under mandatory evacuation.
Yes.
We've seen so many businesses boarded up. Are you surprised that more people haven't left the island?
I am, but I think that, again, that is because we've had only glancing blows in the past, and people are hesitant about leaving their homes, and so they'd rather stay here and ride it out, and we just hope for the best at this point.
We all are. We all are.
Thank
you so much for your time. Yeah, we're here, Atlantic Beach, just north of Jacksonville Beach, and this is where we'll be riding out the storm whenever Dorian makes its way here. Kimberly?
All right, thank you so much, Kaylee. And yes, you heard from the police officer there. Just be prepared. Even if you're not taking it seriously, you want to be prepared. So our affiliate, WPBF, is covering the hurricane, and we want to go to Ron Burke, who is in Fort Pierce, Florida, with the latest from there. Ron?
I'm here on a boat slip at the Fort Pierce Inlet in St. Lucie County, where we have a very strong wind consistently throughout Tuesday morning, just pushing this water forward to the point where now the water is rising to meet the dock here, and in fact it is splashing over the dock from time to time. This water, a few hours ago this morning before we got daylight, was pushing some debris up to the point where the slip met the parking lot, and you can see some of the debris from before. That's from Monday, when we had strong winds and rains pushing up a lot of that debris, and you can see pretty much where that debris line ended on Monday. The water today has not threatened that line to this point, but it is certainly getting very close, as you can see. So the concerns here is, how far is this water going to rise? The street out in front of the parking lot is about 50 yards from here, so it would take probably a great deal of push, this force from the wind behind me, and water, say precipitation, to threaten the street ahead. But we're keeping our eye on this. We're also looking at this as I point you in this direction. This is a sailboat that has been here this morning. We suspect that it got loose from somewhere on Monday or overnight and ended up here in the wee hours of the morning on Tuesday, just leaning just like that, sort of moored into the sand. It has become stuck here just offshore and has been at a 45-degree angle consistently, although it has begun to rock as these winds and the force of this water has begun to push farther and farther towards the shoreline. It is rocking right now, in fact. So we're keeping an eye on that boat. It is called the Fancy Free out of Fort Pierce, Florida. It has been very much an attention getter, with several members of the media coming and doing stories on this boat, which somehow apparently is lost, and perhaps the owner doesn't even know it at this point. But that's what we're looking at right now, the strong winds coupled with the onrushing water, and we wonder if it will replicate what we saw on Monday when we had the strong winds and heavy rains, as the winds are picking up as I speak, and it's beginning to drizzle just a bit as I speak as well. In St. Lucie County at the Fort Pierce Inlet, I'm Ron Burke.
All right. Thank you, Ron. We appreciate those updates. And guys, as with any natural disaster, people will be looking to FEMA for assistance. So I want to bring in our Matthew Van, who's on the ground at the FEMA headquarters in Washington, D.C. So, Matt, if you can just tell us what FEMA is instructing people to do right now.
Kimberly, we're here at the National Response Coordination Center at FEMA headquarters in Washington, D.C. I want you to take a look behind me. This is where emergency management offices all across the state of Florida, first responders, aid groups like the Red Cross, the National Guard, come into contact with FEMA as Hurricane Dorian now makes its way upward past the Florida coast, potentially into parts of Georgia and the Carolinas. Kimberly, I can tell you that there is a sense of urgency here since the Response Coordination Center has been activated. They've been fielding calls on everything from potentially life-threatening situations to evacuations, Kimberly.
Yeah, and Matthew, from your understanding, does it seem like there's clear direction on how people should proceed?
Well, Kimberly, obviously having learned from previous storms and hurricanes that have had a similar track to Dorian, like Hurricane Matthew, appropriately named, FEMA is telling residents in those coastal areas that if they've received a mandatory evacuation, that they should leave. The agency also says that as Hurricane Dorian now makes its way northward past the Florida coast into the Carolinas and parts of Georgia, that strong force winds and storm surges are expected.
And do we know, before we go, if FEMA is already prepared to help the Bahamas?
Kimberly, we're told that FEMA, in conjunction with the State Department, Department of Homeland Security, and the U.S. Coast Guard, are coordinating a response to the Bahamas, the devastation that Dorian has wrought in the Bahamas. And the Coast Guard, the U.S. Coast Guard, is also part of a search and rescue mission on the island as well.
All right, Matthew Van, right at the FEMA headquarters in Washington, D.C. Thank you so much. We appreciate it. And guys, I want to turn to Washington, where the president was at Camp David golfing this weekend. So I want to bring in Karen Travers at the White House to get the latest there. Karen, good to see you. Lots of tweets from the president about the hurricane over the weekend.
Yeah, but no tweets today about Hurricane Dorian, Kimberly. As of 11 o'clock, the president was talking about China. He was talking about the mayor of London, who was critical of him for golfing over the past couple of days. But the president hasn't weighed in yet on Hurricane Dorian. And I think, there was some criticism about the president skipping that trip to Poland, sending Vice President Pence instead, and then spending Saturday at his golf club in Virginia, and then spending much of the day yesterday, the Labor Day holiday, also at the golf club in Virginia. Now, the White House, Kimberly, said the president was getting updates every hour about Hurricane Dorian. He did do a briefing at FEMA on Sunday, but those were the last official comments we have from the president on this storm.
Yeah, Karen, and it also seems he's still unsure about what a Category 5 hurricane is and what that looks like.
Yeah, these were more head-scratching comments from the president at that briefing at FEMA on Sunday. The president saying that he wasn't sure if he'd heard of a Category 5. Do people know about Category 5 storms? It was very easy to show that while the president has been in office over the last 2.5 years, there have been several Category 5s, including Hurricane Michael, which hit last year. I actually traveled down to that area with the president afterwards as he surveyed the damage down there. So not sure why the president continues to say this. But he has certainly said this many times before as he marvels at the strength and size of these storms.
Yeah, and Karen, before we go, as you know, there's lots of news that happened over the weekend, including another mass shooting in Odessa, Texas, that left 7 people dead and over 24 people injured. And the 2020 candidates are outraged. They're fed up. So do we know what Congress is going to be doing to address this situation, given this latest tragedy?
There will be more public pressure. Of course, there's pressure from the campaign trail for lawmakers to take some action on background check legislation or something to tighten gun laws. Remember, at the beginning of August, after the El Paso and Dayton, Ohio shootings, the president right away came out and said that he would favor tougher background checks, only to backtrack from that over the month of August. This weekend, the president reiterating that he thinks there already are enough background check laws on the books, and that doesn't necessarily stop something. The big development, though, today is Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell saying that they'll move forward on something in the Senate if the president says he will sign something, if the president is explicitly clear on what he supports. Of course, the House, Kimberly, has passed a couple different background measures. It hasn't gone anywhere in the Senate. And right now it's a lot of you start, no you start. The president says Congress is working on something. And then we hear today from the Republican leader that it's going to have to be the president who says, let's do this and get the ball moving.
All right, Karen Travers at the White House, thank you so much for the updates. And guys, you'll hear more from all of the candidates on this topic and much more during the ABC News debate next Thursday in Houston. And you'll be able to catch all of that on ABC News Live. And we move to an incredibly tragic story out of Southern California. A recreational scuba diving trip turned deadly when the boat caught fire, and you can see it there. We just got an update from officials in California, and I want to bring in Romina Puga, who's on the ground. Romina, good to see you. Can you just give us the latest number of victims?
Hey, Kim. Yeah, so we just heard there are 20 confirmed recovered bodies. They say there's about 4 to 6 still in the wreckage, but they can't get to it because the boat is unstable. They're working to stabilize the boat, but the search for additional survivors has been suspended. Authorities say the 33 passengers and 1 crew member who were sleeping below deck at the time are presumed dead. And those 5 surviving crew members have submitted written statements and are being interviewed today. We haven't seen those yet.
Yeah, and Romina, you know, this is just, you know, it's tragic because it was happening on Labor Day weekend, and here we are with people still looking for missing bodies as well, right?
Yeah, and we're here at the Santa Barbara boat launch facility. Behind me are actually the 2 other boats that are part of the same fleet as Conception, the same size. Again, it was the 3rd of those boats that caught fire, exploded, and sank yesterday morning.
All right, Romina Puga right there in Oxnard, California with the latest on that tragedy. Thanks for being with us. We appreciate it. And guys, a lot of heavy news today. I hope you continue to take care of yourselves. And if you're around, you can stick around for the briefing room at 3:30 p.m. There's going to be more hurricane coverage there. And then you can check out World News Prime at 8 p.m. And if you want to stay updated on all of these headlines, you can go to abcnews.com or download our app. So guys, thanks for being with us today. I'm Kimberly Brooks, and I'll see you tomorrow.